I think the record as a whole seems to offer a kind of rebuttal to what someone might expect it to be saying. They might expect it to be, again, you know, the contemporary version of technology is like making us less able to relate, and it doesn't do that. And then you're using technology, including auto-tune, that might be expected to be part of the making us less human, to demonstrate these human truths.
I think that's one of the reasons that I made it in the way that I made it, right?
Yeah.
And it was actually sort of the reverse in some ways, right? You know, it's not like I had all of this figured out before I started making the record.
Mm-hmm.
The first song I started working on for the record, I started working on, I was in a hostel in Rome, and had just started producing again. I produced this whole record. I got a little bit of help from other folks, but every song is mostly my work.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of had decided to sort of lean into producing again and focusing on making my own music from the ground up, and I found myself completely unable to sleep in this hostel in sort of the center of Rome, and took my laptop out. I had a little tiny USB microphone with me, my laptop loaded with production software, and sat in the stairwell because that was where the light was and an outlet, and I sat there for must have been 2 or 3 hours, just sort of pulling that kind of stuff together, right, and focusing on that particular experience of being in a country very far away from home, alone, using technology to relate to myself, and by extension the broader world.
Is that the same time that you were writing Checkmate too?
Different.
Different, okay.
Yeah.
But that was another time you were also abroad.
Yeah, so the songs from Mixed Blood sort of run the gamut from a bunch of different time, right? And the record was released in 2016. When I started writing that song must have been 2013, 2014,
Yeah.
while I was studying abroad in Japan.
Yeah.
And then I left Japan and came back to the US and rounded out my last couple of years at the university. And then after that, took time to go to Europe, right? And sort of begin the process of constructing my adulthood, right? And what life looked like without sort of an academic underpinning. And that was when I started working on some of this stuff. And, you know, I'd started some things while I was over there, and I think that's where the underpinnings of the record lie,
Yeah.
but I don't think the emotionality behind it and the real understanding of what I was trying to say with those things came until even this past year.
Which song was it that you were first of all working on in that hostel?
Yeah, so it's actually not on the record.
Okay.
And this record, because I was diving back into production for the first real time, I mean, I did a little bit of production work on Mixed Blood, but not very much. Because I was really diving in deep into the production side of things again, this record entailed more of an editing process than maybe any of the other records that I've done. You know, where, I mean, it was a year ago, right, I had all of these songs done and they all sounded completely different. And the last year, rather than sort of writing conceptually and putting together new songs, I actually put a lot of time into sort of sharpening these songs.
How did you sharpen? What were some of the production decisions you made in the last year?
The record Glass must have gone through 5 or 10 restructures. There were 2 or 3 different rap verses that I put into the middle of that song that didn't end up making the cut.
Why did those particular rap verses not make the cut? Because there is definitely a lower ratio. There's less rapping than one would expect on the EP as a whole.
They were bad.
Okay. So nothing about them being rap. They were just, you didn't think they weren't as good as they happened to not be as good as the other vocals.
I mean, I think it's both, right? I mean, one of the reasons that they weren't as good as the other vocals is because they were rap, right? Because actually, normally my records are so specific and so detail-oriented. And I think it's much more difficult to talk about something like intimacy and technology and lust, right, in incredibly specific terms. So I think actually this record was one where it made sense to have a little bit more negative space.
Yeah.
And to give breathing room to some of these songs and some of the ideas.